During the Independence Day lunch, my daughter-in-law made a toast and said, "I think it's time this old hag finds a place of her own." I stayed silent, but when I finally spoke, every face at the table turned pale. The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating every corner of my son's dining room. I felt the weight of all eyes on me. My son Michael's averted gaze, my grandchildren's confused expressions, and Rebecca's smug smile poorly disguised as concern. I'm Eleanor Caldwell, 72 years old, and until that moment I had never felt so invisible in my own family. The July heat seemed to intensify as silence stretched across the table. The carefully arranged table settings, my mother's antique china that I had given to Michael and Rebecca when they married, suddenly looked foreign. The Independence Day decorations, with their bright reds and blues, felt like a mockery of freedom. "Mom," Michael finally spoke, clearing his throat, "Rebecca just means that the big house must be getting difficult for you to manage on your own." Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. His voice carried that patronizing tone people use with children or the elderly. I had raised this man, nursed him through chickenpox and heartbreaks, and now he couldn't even look me in the eye as his wife suggested I be discarded. The Prescott Historical Society just featured an article about some lovely senior communities in the area, Rebecca added, reaching for her wine glass. "Very exclusive. Very appropriate for someone in your situation." My situation. As if aging was a disease that required quarantine. I looked around at the faces of my family gathered for what was supposed to be a celebration. My grandson Peter, 16 and already taller than his father, studied his plate. My granddaughter Lily, 14, bit her lip, her eyes darting between me and her mother. Even Michael's brother James, visiting from Chicago, suddenly found his napkin fascinating. The colonial house they were so eager for me to abandon had been in my family for 4 generations. I had lived there for 50 years, raised my children within its walls, tended its gardens, and preserved its history. My late husband Richard and I had lovingly restored every inch of that house, uncovering its secrets and preserving its character. "More potato salad, Grandma?" Lily asked, her young voice breaking through the tension. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, finding my voice at last. Rebecca shot her daughter a look that could freeze water. "We don't need to burden your grandmother with too much food. At her age, weight gain can be so troublesome." I hadn't gained a pound in 20 years, but facts rarely mattered to Rebecca. "I'm fine, Lily," I said, reaching for my water glass. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the effort of containing my anger. "Actually, I think I should go home early today. I'm feeling a bit unwelcome." "Mom, please," Michael said, finally looking at me. Rebecca didn't mean anything by it, but she did, and he knew it. I folded my napkin carefully, placing it beside my barely touched plate. "Thank you for lunch. I'll see myself out." As I stood, Rebecca's voice cut through the air again. "See? This is exactly what I mean. So emotional, so dramatic. This is why living alone isn't good for her anymore." I stopped at the doorway, my back to the table. I could leave quietly, as I always had. I could preserve the peace, as I always did. Or I could finally speak my truth. I turned slowly, my spine straightening as I faced them. The room fell silent once more. "Rebecca," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "when your mother was dying and couldn't afford proper care, I paid for her hospice nurse. When you and Michael couldn't make the down payment on this house, I contributed half my savings. When Peter needed braces and your insurance wouldn't cover it, I wrote the check." I paused, watching as Rebecca's smug expression faltered. I have never been a burden to this family. I have only ever been its foundation. And foundations, my dear, aren't so easily discarded. Michael stood up abruptly. "Mom, that's not fair." "No, it isn't fair," I agreed. "But it is true. And perhaps it's time for some truths to be spoken in this house." I left then, walking through the front door into the bright summer afternoon. My old Buick was parked under the maple tree at the end of the driveway. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of Lily watching me from the window, her young face troubled. The drive home was a blur of green landscapes and familiar turns. The colonial house appeared on the horizon, its weathered red brick and white trim standing proud against the summer sky. 4 generations of my family had lived and died within those walls. Now Rebecca wanted me out so they could. What? Sell it, renovate it beyond recognition, turn it into another showcase for her pretentious taste? I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my strength. The house seemed to welcome me home, its familiar silhouette a comfort against the day's humiliation. Inside, I moved through rooms filled with memories. The parlor where Richard had proposed, the study where my children had done their homework, the kitchen where I had taught my grandchildren to bake before Rebecca decided my methods were outdated. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a reminder of my mortality, the very thing Rebecca had weaponized against me. At the top landing, I paused, looking at the closed door that led to the attic. Richard had always kept his important papers there, in old trunks and boxes. I hadn't been up there since his death 3 years ago. Something pulled me toward that door now. Intuition, or perhaps just the need to connect with his memory. I found the key on my ring and unlocked it, pulling the cord for the single bulb that illuminated the steep stairs. The attic air was warm and dry, filled with the scent of old paper and cedar. Dust motes danced in the light from the small round window. I moved carefully between trunks and boxes, remembering how Richard would come up here to commune with the ancestors, as he jokingly called it. In the far corner sat his old leather desk trunk, the one he'd inherited from his grandfather. I knelt beside it, feeling my knees protest, and lifted the heavy lid. Inside were stacks of leather-bound journals, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and manila envelopes labeled, in Richard's neat handwriting. One envelope caught my eye. Eleanor, read in case of disputes over the house. My heart quickened as I pulled it out. Richard had been gone 3 years. Why hadn't he mentioned this before? I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in my husband's handwriting and several official-looking documents. Dearest Eleanor, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone and someone is challenging your right to our home. I've always feared that Michael's choice in Rebecca might one day cause such problems. I sat back on an old trunk, clutching the letter to my chest as tears filled my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, Richard was still protecting me, still fighting for our home. And in that dusty attic, surrounded by the physical remnants of our family's history, I made a decision. Rebecca would not win. This house, with all its memories and secrets, would not be taken from me. I may have stayed silent at that lunch table, but I would not be silent anymore. The attic air felt warm and still as I carefully opened Richard's old leather trunk. Inside lay bundles of letters, journals, and manila envelopes, remnants of our life together. One envelope caught my eye immediately. Eleanor, read in case of disputes over the house. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a letter in Richard's familiar handwriting and several official-looking documents. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone and someone is challenging your right to our home. During the renovation of the East Wing, I discovered something extraordinary behind the old plaster wall, a hidden compartment containing documents from the Revolutionary War period. I consulted Martin Wallace privately, who confirmed their authenticity and significant historical value. These documents include correspondence between Jonathan Caldwell and several founding fathers. Our house served as a meeting place for revolutionaries planning the early framework of our nation. This isn't just our family home, Eleanor. It's a piece of American history that deserves preservation. I examined the other contents: authentication papers with university letterheads, photographs of yellowed documents, and Professor Wallace's assessment estimating their historical value as a significant six-figure sum, but arguably priceless in historical significance. My hands trembled as I carefully returned everything to the envelope. Richard had left me more than memories. He'd left me ammunition. Downstairs in the kitchen, I put on the kettle for tea, a ritual that had comforted me through 50 years of life's challenges. As the water heated, I noticed my answering machine blinking. 5 messages. I pressed play. Michael's voice came first. Mom, I'm sorry about lunch. Rebecca didn't mean it the way it sounded. Delete. Another from Michael. We're worried about you driving home upset. Delete. Then Rebecca's voice, dripping with false concern. I only meant that the house must be so much work for you. I have some brochures from Sunny Pines Retirement Village I'd love to show you. Delete. Grandma, it's Lily. My granddaughter's voice made me pause. I'm sorry about what Mom said. I've been wanting to tell you something important. Can I come over tomorrow after school? Please don't tell Mom or Dad. Save. The final message froze my blood. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Thomas Reynolds from Reynolds Real Estate. I'm following up on our conversation from last week regarding the valuation of your property. I have some interested parties who... I stopped the message abruptly. I had never contacted any real estate agent, never discussed valuing my property with anyone. The kettle whistled as my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the caller ID. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Mom, finally. He sounded relieved. I've been calling for hours. I was in the attic, going through your father's things. A pause. Why? What were you looking for? His suspicious tone caught me off guard. Since when did my son question my movements in my own home? Just reminiscing, I lied. Mom, we need to talk about what happened. Rebecca feels terrible. Does she? I sipped my tea. Funny, she didn't seem terrible when she called me an old hag at the lunch table. She didn't mean it that way, Michael insisted. Sometimes her jokes come out wrong. It wasn't a joke, Michael, and it wasn't the first time. I paused. Who is Thomas Reynolds? The silence that followed told me everything. How do you know that name? He finally asked, his voice tight. He left a message about valuing my property. Except I never spoke with him. It's not what you think, Michael said quickly. Are you and Rebecca planning to sell my house without my consent, Mom? That's ridiculous. We're just exploring options for when you can't manage on your own anymore. And who decides when that is? Rebecca? We're concerned about you living alone in that big house. It's a lot to maintain at your age. I'm 72, Michael, not 102. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. For now, maybe. But eventually, I'll decide what happens to my home. Not you, and certainly not Rebecca. After hanging up, I went to my study and found our family address book. I flipped to the W section and dialed. Professor Martin Wallace answered on the third ring. Hello? Martin, it's Eleanor Caldwell. Eleanor, how wonderful to hear from you. It's been, 3 years? Since the funeral? Martin, I need to ask you about documents Richard found in our house. A pause. I was wondering if you'd ever call about those. They're real then? You authenticated them? Very much so. Revolutionary. Era correspondence, quite significant. Richard swore me to secrecy until the time was right. He left me a letter, I explained. I found it today. Eleanor, those documents aren't just valuable in monetary terms. They're historically significant. They could change the understood narrative about certain events during our nation's formation. Significant. Enough to qualify the house for historical landmark status? Absolutely. That would protect it from development or significant alteration. I felt a surge of relief. I think my son and his wife are planning to sell my house without my consent. Good Lord. Can they do that? I don't know. But I intend to find out. I could come by tomorrow to re-examine the documents. Proper documentation with the Historical Society would be the first step in protecting the house. I'd appreciate that enormously. Could you come around 4? Absolutely. And Eleanor? Richard would be proud of you for protecting this legacy. The next morning, as I prepared to visit our family lawyer, I noticed a car slowing in front of my house, a black SUV I didn't recognize. It circled the block and returned, stopping across from my driveway. A man in a suit emerged and began photographing my house. I marched outside. Excuse me, why are you photographing my home? He lowered his camera, startled. Just documenting. The property, ma'am. For what purpose? I'm with Reynolds Real Estate, just doing a standard assessment. Commissioned by whom? I demanded. I'm afraid that's confidential. He retreated to his vehicle. Have a nice day, Mrs. Caldwell. He knew my name. Of course he did. As I backed out of my driveway, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small "For Sale by Owner" sign, partially hidden in the hydrangeas. It wasn't visible from the house, only from the street. I slammed on the brakes, got out, and yanked the sign from the ground. Thomas Reynolds' number was printed below the words, "Coming soon." I threw it into my trunk, my heart pounding with fury and fear. They weren't just planning to sell my house. They had already started. Chapter 3. The Betrayal. Revealed Gerald Hoffman's law office hadn't changed in 30 years. the same wood-paneled walls and leather chairs. I placed the for sale sign on his desk, my hand steadier than I expected. They put this on my property without my knowledge, I said. And a real estate agent was photographing my house this morning. Gerald examined the sign, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. This is concerning, Eleanor. Michael claims they're just exploring options for when I can't manage on my own. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Gerald leaned back, fingers steepled. The good news is that the house is solely in your name. Richard was very clear about that when he transferred ownership to you. Then how could they possibly sell it without my consent? He sighed, polishing his glasses. They could petition for guardianship if they could prove you're no longer competent to manage your affairs. I'm perfectly competent, I snapped. I know that, Gerald said gently, but these cases can get messy. It would be your word against theirs, and if they've been laying groundwork, what kind of groundwork? Comments to friends about your memory. Suggestions that you're having trouble with daily tasks. Maybe even discussions with your doctor. A cold dread settled in my stomach. They wouldn't. Gerald's expression said otherwise. It happens more often than you'd think. What can I do? First, we document your mental competency with an independent evaluation. Second, we need to understand what they've set in motion with this Reynolds fellow. And third, I said, pulling Richard's envelope from my purse, there's this. I explained about the Revolutionary War documents. Gerald's eyes widened. This could be your ace, Eleanor. Historical designation would make it nearly impossible for them to sell the property, even if they gained control. Professor Wallace is coming this afternoon to re-examine everything. Excellent. Push for expedited designation. As I left, I felt marginally better. At least I had a plan. But the betrayal still cut deep. I arrived home to find Rebecca's Mercedes in my driveway. She stood on my porch, her expression schooled into concern when she spotted me. Eleanor, I've been so worried. I approached slowly. Have you? How thoughtful. Her smile faltered. Michael said you were upset. I thought we should talk, woman to woman. I unlocked the door without responding and walked inside. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on the stove more to have something to do with my hands than from any sense of hospitality. Rebecca perched on a bar stool. I want to apologize for yesterday, she said, her voice practiced. The toast was meant to be lighthearted. I turned to face her. Let's not pretend, Rebecca. I found the for sale sign hidden in my hydrangeas, and I met the man photographing my house. The color drained from her face, then quickly returned. That's not... We were just what? Planning to sell my home without my consent? Laying groundwork to have me declared incompetent? Her momentary shock gave way to calculation. Eleanor, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're concerned about you living alone in this enormous house. It's too much for someone your age. Yet I've managed quite well for the 3 years since Richard died. She sighed with exaggerated patience. People decline, Eleanor. We're simply being proactive. By listing my house for sale without telling me, we're exploring options, she repeated. The market assessment is just preliminary research. And the sign? Rebecca's eyes hardened. You're being difficult. This is exactly why we're concerned. Because I object to having my property sold? Out from under me? Because you're becoming paranoid and combative. She leaned forward. Michael's noticed changes in your behavior. Forgetfulness. Confusion. So there it was. The groundwork Gerald had warned about. The kettle whistled, but I made no move to remove it. Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirt. I can see you're not in a reasonable mood. We can discuss this later, with Michael present. Yes, let's do that. And let's also discuss why you've been talking to my doctor behind my back. It was a guess based on Gerald's warning, but her momentary freeze told me I'd hit the mark. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Dr. Simmons's office called about an appointment I never made, an appointment to discuss my cognitive health. Another guess, but Rebecca's flushed face confirmed my suspicions. We're worried about you, that's all. No, Rebecca, you're not worried. You're greedy. I moved to silence the screaming kettle. This house sits on 5 acres in the most desirable part of town. The property alone is worth millions. That's unfair, she protested, eyes darting away. What's unfair is plotting to have your mother-in-law declared incompetent so you can sell her home for profit. Rebecca grabbed her purse, her composure cracking. You've always hated me. From the moment Michael brought me home, you've looked down on me. That's not true, I said quietly. I welcomed you. I helped pay for your wedding. I never judged you until you gave me reason to. You think you're so clever, she spat. The sweet, innocent grandmother everyone should feel sorry for. I don't want pity. I just want basic respect. Respect? She laughed harshly. You're just a burden, Eleanor. A relic taking up space and resources. Your time is over. The cruelty of her words stole my breath. But before I could respond, the front door opened and Lily's voice called out, Grandma, are you home? Rebecca's head snapped toward the sound, her expression shifting to one of alarm. She hadn't expected her daughter to arrive so early. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She froze when she saw her mother, eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing with suspicion. Mom, what are you doing here? Rebecca recovered quickly, her expression shifting from contempt to maternal concern so seamlessly that I almost doubted what I'd heard seconds before. Lily, what are you doing here? School doesn't let out for another hour. Lily shifted her weight, from one foot to the other, her eyes darting between us. At 14, she was already taller than her mother, with Richard's dark hair and thoughtful eyes. Half day, she said. Teacher development. I texted Dad about it yesterday. Rebecca's smile tightened. Well, Grandma and I were just having a private conversation. Why don't you wait in the car and I'll drive you home? Actually, I interjected. Lily and I had plans this afternoon. She called me yesterday. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Did she? How interesting that neither of you mentioned it to me. Lily stepped further into the kitchen, her chin lifting slightly. I wanted to talk to Grandma about something. Alone. About what, exactly? Rebecca's voice had an edge that made Lily flinch. I moved to stand beside my granddaughter. That's between Lily and me, Rebecca. Now, if you'll excuse us— No, I won't excuse you, she snapped. Lily is my daughter, and I have every right to know what she's doing and who she's talking to. Mom, Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. I just want to spend some time with Grandma. Rebecca grabbed her purse from the counter. Get in the car, Lily. Now. No. The single word hung in the air. Rebecca stared at her daughter as if she'd sprouted a second head. Excuse me? I said no. Lily's voice trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. I'm staying with Grandma today. Rebecca's face flushed. This is ridiculous. You're 14 years old. You don't get to decide. Actually, I cut in. At 14, she's old enough to have a say in which grandparent she spends time with, especially when that grandparent has legal custody rights. It was a bluff. I had no formal custody arrangement, but Rebecca wasn't well versed in family law. She hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. Fine, she finally said, her voice cold. Have your little chat, but this isn't over, Eleanor. She turned to Lily. And you and I will discuss your attitude when you get home. She stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. Through the kitchen window, I watched her Mercedes back out of the driveway at an unsafe speed. Lily let out a long breath. Wow. Indeed. I turned to her with concern. Are you all right? She nodded, dropping her backpack on a kitchen chair. I'm sorry I interrupted. I didn't know Mom would be here. I'm glad you came when you did, I said honestly. Your timing was perfect. Was she being awful to you? Lily asked, her perceptiveness reminding me so much of Richard. I hesitated, not wanting to place Lily in the middle of adult conflicts. We were having a disagreement. About them trying to sell your house? I stared at her, startled. How do you know about that? Lily pulled a folded paper from her pocket and placed it on the counter. It was a printout of an email, addressed to Michael from Thomas Reynolds Real Estate. I found this on Dad's printer last week, she said quietly. They've been meeting with this Reynolds guy for a month. They think they can get $7 million for the property if they tear down the house and sell the land to developers. My legs suddenly felt weak. I sank into a chair, the reality of their betrayal hitting me anew. Tear down the house? Lily nodded, her eyes sad. Mom says old houses like this are money pits, that no one wants outdated floor plans and ancient plumbing when they could have new construction. I pressed a hand to my heart, trying to steady myself. This house had been built in 1789, stood through wars and depressions, sheltered generations of Caldwells. The thought of it being demolished for some soulless development was physically painful. There's more, Lily said hesitantly. That's why I wanted to see you. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her tablet. After a few taps, she turned it toward me. On the screen was a recording app with several saved files. I've been recording their conversations, she admitted. After I found that email, I wanted to know what they were planning. Lily, I started, not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. I know it's probably wrong, she said quickly, but they're being wrong too. Listen, she pressed play on one of the files. Rebecca's voice filled the kitchen. Just need to convince the doctor that she's showing signs of cognitive decline. Some forgetfulness, some confusion, maybe some paranoia. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Michael's voice responded, sounding uncertain. I don't know, Beck. Mom seems perfectly fine to me. Of course she seems fine in short visits. But if we tell Dr. Simmons we're seeing concerning patterns, he'll have to take it seriously, especially with her age. And then what? Then we suggest she might need assistance managing her affairs. We get power of attorney, put the house on the market, and move her into that nice assisted living place in Brookside. What if she refuses? Rebecca's laugh was cold. That's the beauty of it, Michael. Once we have guardianship, she won't have a choice. Lily stopped the recording, her eyes fixed on me. There are others like this. They've been planning it for weeks. I sat very still, absorbing this final confirmation of what I'd suspected. My own son conspiring to have me declared incompetent. Lily, I said slowly, do you understand what you've gotten involved in? This is a very serious matter. She nodded, her young face solemn. I know. But what they're doing is wrong, Grandma. This is your house. They can't just take it from you because they want the money. No, they can't, I agreed, newfound determination, replacing my shock. And they won't. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I glanced at my watch. 3:45. That will be Professor Wallace, I said, rising. He's going to help us with something important. Lily followed me to the door, curious. Martin Wallace stood on the porch, his white beard and tweed jacket giving him the quintessential professor look. He beamed when he saw me. Eleanor, wonderful to see you. His eyes crinkled as he smiled, then widened with recognition when he spotted Lily. And this must be your granddaughter. The resemblance to Richard is striking. Martin, this is Lily, I confirmed. And yes, she has her grandfather's eyes. And his curiosity, Lily added with a small smile. Grandma says you're here to help with something important. Martin's expression grew serious. Indeed I am. Your grandfather discovered something quite remarkable in this house. Something of great historical significance. I ushered them both into Richard's study, where I had placed the envelope and its contents on the desk. Martin authenticated these documents for your grandfather 3 years ago, I explained to Lily. Now we need to take the next step. For the next hour, Martin carefully examined each document, photographing them with a special camera he'd brought, and making detailed notes. Lily watched, fascinated, as he explained the historical context of each letter. This correspondence between Jonathan Caldwell and Alexander Hamilton is particularly significant, he said, pointing to one yellowed page. It references discussions about financial systems that would later become part of Hamilton's economic plan for the new nation. Our Jonathan Caldwell? Lily asked, eyes wide. The one who built this house? Martin nodded. Your ancestors played a more significant role in early American history than most people realize. This house wasn't just a residence, it was a meeting place for revolutionary thinkers. Does that mean the house could be protected? I asked. As a historical landmark? Without question, Martin confirmed. These documents provide the evidence we need. I'll submit the application to the Historical Society today. Given the significance, I believe we can expedite the process. How long would that normally take? I asked. Several months, typically, but I serve on the board, and I can request an emergency hearing given the circumstances. He gave me a knowing look. You mentioned on the phone that there's some urgency? I hesitated, glancing at Lily. She nodded encouragingly. My son and his wife are attempting to sell the house without my consent, I admitted. They've taken steps to have me declared incompetent so they can gain control of the property. Martin's bushy eyebrows shot up. Good Lord, that's unconscionable. We have proof, Lily said, reaching for her tablet. I recorded them talking about it. As Martin listened to the recording, his expression darkened. When it finished, he straightened his shoulders with newfound determination. I'll call an emergency meeting for tomorrow, he declared. This isn't just about preserving history anymore. It's about justice. As he gathered the documents to take with him for the application process, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since finding that for sale sign. With the house designated as a historical landmark, Michael and Rebecca's plans would be Thwarted, regardless of any guardianship maneuvers. After Martin left, promising to call as soon as the meeting was scheduled, Lily and I sat in the kitchen with cups of hot chocolate. "Do you think it will work?" she asked, her young face serious. Serious? I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I think we have a fighting chance now, thanks to you. I just wish Dad wasn't part of this," she said softly. "I keep hoping he'll stand up to Mom, but he never does." The sadness in her voice broke my heart. No child should have to see their parent that way. "Your father loves you very much," I said carefully. "But sometimes adults make poor choices, especially when money is involved." $7 million, she murmured. "That's why Mom wants the house so badly. She's always talking about moving to a bigger place, getting a vacation home in the Hamptons, joining the country club." I nodded, unsurprised. Rebecca had always been focused on status and appearances. "What will happen if they find out I helped you?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice small. I hadn't considered that. What would Rebecca do if she discovered her daughter had been recording their conversations and sharing them with me? "Let's make sure they don't find out," I said firmly. "This stays between us, at least for now." As Lily gathered her things to leave, promising to text me if she heard anything new at home, I felt an odd mixture of pride and concern. My granddaughter had shown remarkable courage and moral clarity, but I worried about putting her in this position. I watched from the porch as she walked down the driveway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Just before reaching the street, she turned and waved. "Don't worry, Grandma," she called back. "We won't let them take your house." "We." The word warmed me. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The next morning dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that Richard had always said made me look formidable. Exactly the impression I needed for today's emergency meeting at the Historical Society. Gerald Hoffman had called late the previous evening. After speaking with Martin Wallace, "This is a stroke of genius, Eleanor," he'd said, admiration in his voice. "Historical designation would prevent development regardless of who has legal control of the property. It's the perfect protection." His words had given me hope, but I knew better than to underestimate Rebecca. She wasn't someone who surrendered easily, especially with millions at stake. As I finished my coffee, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but perhaps it was time to confront him directly. "Hello, Michael." "Mom." His voice sounded strained. "We need to talk, in person. Can I come over this morning?" "I'm afraid I have an appointment. Perhaps this afternoon?" "What kind of appointment?" The suspicion in his tone was unmistakable. "That's really not your concern," I replied evenly. "I'm still capable of managing my own schedule." He sighed heavily. "Mom, Rebecca told me about your conversation yesterday. I think you misunderstood. Did I misunderstand the for sale sign hidden in my garden? Or the real estate agent photographing my house? Or the appointment with my doctor that I never made?" Silence stretched between us. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice weak. "Then what is it, Michael? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and Rebecca are trying to force me out of my home for profit. We're concerned about you, that's all. This house is too big, too old, too much work. This house," I cut in, "has been my home for 50 years. Your father and I raised you here. We restored every inch of it with our own hands. And now you want to tear it down for a development deal?" Another pause. "How did you know about that?" I caught myself, realizing my mistake. I couldn't reveal Lily's involvement. "The real estate agent's website," I improvised. "The listing is already drafted, Michael. Prime development opportunity. 5 acres in historic district, zoned for multi-unit construction. Mom, you have to understand. Rebecca and I have financial needs." "What needs?" I asked sharply. "You're both well employed. You live in a beautiful home. Your children want for nothing. It's complicated," he hedged. "No, it's quite simple. You want my house because it's worth millions, and you don't want to wait until I'm gone to get it. That's not fair. What's not fair is plotting to have your mother declared incompetent to steal her home." The words hung between us, sharp and undeniable. "I would never," he started, but I cut him off. "Save it for this afternoon, Michael. I need to leave for my appointment." I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly. Confronting my son directly had been even harder than I'd anticipated. The Historical Society occupied a stately Greek revival building in the center of town. As I climbed the marble steps, Martin Wallace met me at the entrance, his expression Encouraging. The board is assembled, he said quietly. I've presented the initial documentation, and they're quite excited about the discovery. This could be the most significant historical finding in the county in decades. Inside, 7 board members sat around a polished conference table. All were familiar faces from town. The mayor's wife, 2 university professors, a retired judge, a local museum curator, the town librarian, and the elderly owner of the town newspaper. Mrs. Caldwell, Judge Williams greeted me warmly. Professor Wallace has been sharing the remarkable discovery in your home. We're quite eager to see the documents ourselves. For the next hour, I watched as Martin presented Richard's findings to the board. He projected high-resolution images of the letters on a screen, explaining their historical context and significance. The board members leaned forward in their seats, clearly captivated. These letters confirm that the Caldwell house served as a meeting place for Hamilton and several other founding fathers during the critical period when they were drafting early economic policies, Martin explained. The house itself contains architectural features specifically designed to conceal these meetings from British sympathizers. This is extraordinary, Mayor Harrison's wife breathed, examining a close-up of Hamilton's signature. Absolutely extraordinary. Given the historical significance, Martin continued, I propose immediate protective designation for the property. As you know, this would prevent any demolition, significant alteration, or development of the site. Judge Williams nodded thoughtfully. The evidence certainly warrants designation. However, our process typically includes a 90-day public comment period. Judge, I said, speaking for the first time, I must respectfully request an expedited process. There are immediate threats to the property. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and explained the situation as simply as I could. My son and daughter-in-law's plans to sell the property, their attempts to have me declared incompetent, the real estate listing already in preparation. The room fell silent when I finished. Judge Williams removed his glasses and polished them slowly. Mrs. Caldwell, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence of these claims? I hesitated, thinking of Lily's recordings. I couldn't expose her involvement. My attorney has documentation of the unauthorized for sale sign and real estate assessment, I said carefully, and there are witnesses to my daughter-in-law's statements about having me removed from my home. The judge exchanged glances with the other board members. I believe, he said finally, that these circumstances justify emergency action. All those in favor of immediate historical designation for the Caldwell property, pending final review after the standard comment period? 7 hands rose in unison. The motion passes unanimously, Judge Williams announced. The Caldwell House is hereby granted preliminary historical landmark status, effective immediately. No demolition, development, or significant alteration may proceed. Relief washed over me so intensely that I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you all. As the meeting adjourned, Martin squeezed my shoulder gently. Richard would be so proud, Eleanor. You've preserved not just your home, but an important piece of American history. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. I had won this battle, but the war with Michael and Rebecca was far from over. Outside the Historical Society, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Michael and a text message. Coming over at 2. We need to talk. I smiled grimly. Yes, we certainly did need to talk. But now I would be doing so from a position of strength. What I didn't expect was to find both Michael and Rebecca already waiting on my porch when I arrived home, their faces tight with barely contained anger. The real battle was about to begin. Rebecca spotted me first, her eyes narrowing as I approached the porch. She wore her power outfit, a tailored black suit with red heels. Michael stood beside her looking uncomfortable, as if he'd been dragged from work for this confrontation. Where have you been? Rebecca demanded. We've been waiting for over an hour. I had an appointment, I replied calmly, moving past them to unlock the door. What kind of appointment? She pressed, following me inside. I turned to face them both. A meeting with the Historical Society. Michael frowned. The Historical Society? What for? To discuss the historical significance of this house, I said, and to initiate the process for having it designated as a protected landmark. Rebecca's face flushed red. You did what? As of 30 minutes ago, this house has been granted preliminary landmark status. No demolition, development, or significant alteration may proceed. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally understanding. Rebecca remained frozen, her lips pressed into a thin white line. "That's not possible," she finally said. "You can't just rush through a designation like that." "Actually, I can when there's both historical merit and imminent threat to the property." The board voted unanimously after reviewing the Revolutionary War documents found hidden in the house. "What documents?" Michael asked, clearly lost. "Letters between your ancestor Jonathan Caldwell and Alexander Hamilton. Your father discovered them during our restoration of the East Wing. The house served as a meeting place for founding fathers during the formation of our nation's economic systems." Rebecca recovered quickly. "These supposed documents conveniently appeared just when you needed them? That sounds awfully suspicious." "They were authenticated 3 years ago by Professor Wallace. Your father kept them secret until the time was right." "This is ridiculous," Rebecca snapped. "You can't prevent us from helping you make appropriate living arrangements just because some old papers were found in the walls." "I don't need help with my living arrangements," I said. "And this isn't about the documents, it's about your attempts to force me out of my home so you can sell it for development." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that's not—" "Don't lie to me, Michael," I interrupted. "I know about the meetings with Thomas Reynolds. I know about the $7 million offer for the property. I know about your plans to have me declared incompetent." His face paled. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know," I said firmly. "What matters is that you were willing to betray your own mother for money." Rebecca stepped forward, her expression cold. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Finding some old letters, running to the Historical Society. But this doesn't change anything. You're still an elderly woman living alone in a house that's too big for you." "I'm managing just fine," I said calmly. "For now, maybe. But what about next year? Or the year after that?" Her voice softened to a dangerous purr. "Accidents happen, Eleanor, especially to women your age. A fall down those steep stairs? A kitchen fire when you forget to turn off the stove? Are you threatening me?" I asked, stunned. "I'm stating facts," she replied smoothly. "Michael and I are concerned about your safety. Aren't we, Michael?" My son looked trapped. "I just want what's best for everyone," he said weakly. "What's best," I said, holding his gaze, "would have been for you to be honest with me. To discuss your concerns openly instead of plotting behind my back." The doorbell rang, startling all of us. I rose to answer it, finding Gerald Hoffman and Professor Wallace on my porch, along with a third man I didn't recognize. "Eleanor," Gerald said, "we have some paperwork for you to sign regarding the historical designation. Is this a bad time?" "Not at all," I replied, opening the door wider. "My son and daughter-in-law were just leaving." The third man stepped forward, extending an official-looking document toward Rebecca and Michael. "Thomas Reynolds, Prescott County District Attorney's Office. This is a cease and desist order regarding your unauthorized attempts to sell property not in your ownership." Michael blanched. "District Attorney? I don't understand." "Falsely representing ownership of property with intent to sell constitutes real estate fraud, Mr. Caldwell," the man explained. "Given your wife's position at the law firm, we're particularly concerned about the ethical implications." Rebecca's face drained of color. As a partner at her law firm, an ethics investigation could destroy her career. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "We were merely exploring options." "Save it for your attorney," Thomas Reynolds advised. "You'll need one." Michael looked shell-shocked. "Mom, I never meant for things to go this far. I didn't know about the fraud." "Then perhaps," I suggested gently, "you should start paying closer attention to what happens in your life, Michael. Starting with your wife's actions." Rebecca grabbed his arm. "We're leaving. Don't say another word without our lawyer present." After they left, Gerald explained that the real Thomas Reynolds had agreed to help after learning about Rebecca's scheme. "The AI cease and desist is real," Gerald confirmed. "The DA's office takes these cases seriously, especially when they involve elder exploitation." "Will they be prosecuted?" I asked. "That depends on whether you wish to press charges," Gerald replied. "For now, the warning should be sufficient to end their attempts to take your home." Professor Wallace smiled warmly. "And with the historical designation in place, your house is protected regardless." That evening, I sat alone in Richard's study, surrounded by the remnants of history. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Everything okay, Grandma?" I smiled, typing back, Everything is fine. Your grandmother still has a few tricks up her sleeve. Mom and Dad had a huge fight when they got home. Dad's sleeping in the guest room. I sighed, sorry for the turmoil, but relieved that Michael might finally be seeing the truth. Get some sleep, sweetheart, I texted. Come visit this weekend if you can. We'll bring Peter too. Love you. Love you more. I set the phone down and looked around the room that had been the heart of our home for half a century. The walls that had witnessed our joys and sorrows. The windows that had framed countless sunrises and sunsets. We did it, Richard, I whispered to the empty room. We protected our home, and somewhere, in the creaking of the old floorboards and the gentle sigh of the evening breeze through the open window, I could almost hear him answer, "Well done, my love. Well done."